Hey, if you have some ceiling water damage or other damage and you need to cut it out, it can be a little bit tricky, but I'm going to show you how to lay it out so that it's square, things fit right, and I'm going to show you that right after this. The reason I'm going to do this video is because whenever you've got to do a ceiling repair like the one in this picture, what we have here is some water damage, it's sagging, and anytime it's water damage on a ceiling, it's going to sag. And if it doesn't, you probably don't need to replace it unless it just crumbled or something. But here's the problem. If you can imagine this for a second, we've got a ceiling is sagging and bowing from 4 different directions usually. So it's kind of like a bubble in the sheetrock. So when you try and lay it out, nothing wants to sit right on it. So imagine this is the bulge turned upside down. You lay your straight edges on it and they rock and squares don't fit, and it's just hard to lay it out. So I'm going to show you a few tricks that I use to make it simpler. Okay, here's the area that I'm working on. We have to cut it out from about over here to here and about to here. Now, first of all, how do you figure out how much needs to be cut out? How far do you go? Well, what you might want to use is one of these things right here, which is basically, a straight edge. And with a straight edge, if you put it up here, you can see that it rocks. Well, that doesn't help you a whole lot. So what I do is I start back here where it's relatively flat, and don't be surprised if your ceiling has some bows and waviness in it, because that's normal. So just start where it's kind of relatively flat and you start bringing it across and watch the gap in here and over here. When you see this end start getting a gap, you know your hump. The majority of it is ending right about here. So I just backed it up a little bit and we're going to cut it right there. All right, and note that our ceiling joists are going this way. So this is the open area. Now to figure out where to cut this way, I like to just go to the middle of the ceiling joist. You can go to the side, put a nailer up in there, and that'll work too. So whatever works for you, but you'll see with this tool that I use, it cuts down the center about as easy as it does out here. So by cutting it down the center, I do 2 things. I get 2 parallel lines here, and then I don't have to put backing in. So how do you find the center? Well, you could use a stud finder if you've got a good one that'll mark the center, but an easy way is stick your saw through the sheetrock well before that ceiling joist and just start cutting. Now cut with your saw straight up and down, and as soon as it hits and stops, you know you've hit the ceiling joist. Now what you want to do is stand looking at it like this. You want to make sure it's your saw blade straight up and down, and then just mark out about 3/4 of an inch to the side of it, because the stud is 1.5 inches wide. So that way you're marking about the center. And then I go do the same thing on the other end. I do all 4 corners, but then I measure it. So I measure from here to here, then I go down there, and sometimes I might want to make a little adjustment one way or the other so that these are parallel. That way your sheetrock will fit easier, it's easier to cut. Don't go too far or you might run off of your ceiling joist. So now once you've figured out the centers and you've marked it with your little arrow, now you got to mark it with a straight edge. Well, that can be hard when this is bowing. You try and put a straight edge up there and it rocks. If you got a helper, it's not too bad. Here's a little trick if you're by yourself. Okay, what I do is I put a screw or a nail in where the inside edge of this screw is right on the edge of this pencil line. So if I put a straight edge up there, it's right on the edge of my pencil line. Go down there, do the same thing, Then when you take your straight edge up here, all you have to do is touch that one, touch this one, hold it, and it's not going to move. The rocking doesn't affect you as much because this kind of locks it down, and you can go ahead and trace your straight edge. But you see, if I try and hold it in the middle here without the screws, it's only hitting in the middle, so it's hard to hold with one hand and mark with the others. So the screw method works really good. Do this one, do that one, then you got to figure out how to square off of this way. So we follow that same procedure. But this time we want one screw here and one not too far back this way, and get it into the stud a little bit. And then you'll either need a drywall T-square like this, or just a framing square would work if you don't have to go too far this way. This is generally only 2 feet, so a framing square will work, but if you're cutting out a bigger section, this will go 4 feet. But to trace it on the ceiling, you have to actually lay it upside down. If you lay it this way where you can read it, it's got this gap right here. So you flip it over like this and put this up against here, and then you've marked here because you brought your straight edge over here, made a mark here. You did the same over there. Now when you put it against these screws, it's holding it right on that line. It's square. You go ahead and mark it, and you've got a nice square end. Do the same thing on the other end, and then all you got to do is cut it out. And I'm going to show you how I cut it out. I use an oscillating tool that's really handy, and to me it saves a lot of time and does a great job. Okay, I've got my hearing protection on. It's really not the Mickey Mouse Club. And then what we're going to use is our oscillating tool. This is a DeWalt. This blade is my absolute, sounds really funny when I'm talking with these on. This blade is my absolute favorite for cutting straight lines of drywall. It's by DeWalt. It can be kind of hard to find. I get it from Amazon, so I'll put a link to that in the description, as well as to this tool if you're interested in this. So one reason I like this is it's wide. By being wide, it helps you cut straighter lines. Narrow blades tend to want to walk more. So with a wide blade, it just allows you to cut these straight lines better. And this thing stays sharp a long time. I've used a lot of blades and I usually go through them like mad. This one will last me months. But there's also another blade out there I use fairly often. I'll show you a picture of it here. It's a dedicated drywall blade. The advantage to that is you can cut curves by pulling it. You can push cut. You can shave with it. It's got some really cool features. And I'll put a link to that in the description also. Now, this ceiling actually has 2 layers of sheetrock. You can see in this picture here that it had popcorn at one time. I just removed the popcorn off this layer, so this is kind of funny. They had popcorn. It probably has asbestos in it, but we don't know that. We've had this tested. It didn't have asbestos. So they put a new layer of sheetrock over it, and they could have done it just because they thought it was easier. Some people do. So we don't know what that is. So I'm going to be cautious and wear a mask and breathe as little as I can just in case. Okay, since this is so black and looks like some black mold, it's probably dead because I think this has been dry a long time. But I'm going to be safe and spray some mold control on it. I'll put a link to this too down in the description. This is made specifically for this. Okay, I'm going to pull this down. Beware, it might just fall, so be prepared for that. But as I pull this down, expect a mountain of insulation to fall. So if you can get up in there and rake it back off to the side and then push it back over when you're done, that's better. This one We looked up in there, there's a duct in the way. It's only about 2 or 3 feet tall in there. We just can't get up there. So we're just gonna let it fall and then replace it. Okay, we finished cutting that hole out and we ran into that surprise of 2 layers of sheetrock up here. The old popcorn ceiling got covered up with a layer of sheetrock. So now we have a different scenario. Plus, when I was doing the cutting over with my saw to find the ceiling joist, I was hitting this plywood. Well, modern trusses they're not made with plywood like this. Some older ones were. So what I was doing was hitting this and marking over 3/4, and that was throwing me off. So now we have to put some backing pieces in because of these pieces of plywood. Anytime you're putting up backing pieces, you actually don't have to put up the same exact thickness. So if you happen to have 5/8, but it was 1/2 inch, you just raise your backing piece a little higher. And that's what we're gonna do here. We're using 5/8 where there was 1/2 inch. Then I screwed a piece to the bottom here. You could just hold it, but this is so that when you put your backing piece up here, you can look across here and see when it's flush. Now I'm gonna turn this and have it stick over there a little bit. So you just put this piece up here until this lines up with this. If you're gonna have these off at all, have this one ever so slightly higher. You don't want it lower or you're gonna have this hump that you have to float way out here. If it's slightly higher, you actually just have to float more into the middle, which you have to do anyway. Now another thing you could do is use another straight edge to give you that guide right there. That would tell you exactly when you're at the right depth. Okay, a little trick here you might want to do to try and keep this from moving on you when you run the screw in is run the screw out just ever so slightly on this back side. That'll give it a little tooth to bite so it won't slide so easy. Now I did pre-drill these with a drill bit because it makes it a whole lot easier to run them in. Then we just want to run around and put all the backing pieces in and we're ready to hang our rock. Now should you get this backing piece just a little bit too high, you can put a cardboard shim in here and take up that slack. But if you get it a little bit too low, you have to redo it. Okay, another little quick tip about this. If you're cutting this piece to go on here and guide you, make sure it's not the recessed edge. It needs to be totally raw or that's going to be thinner and throw you off a bit. It's often easier to put these up in 2 pieces anyway because of the way that you don't always get a really perfectly straight cut. Had to do a little minor trimming. Now once you get it hung, what you might want to do is go around and just clean it up. This little stuff like this. Once you get it all cleaned up, you're ready to tape it and coat it. Now if you want to see how I go through that process, there's another video. I've completely done a ceiling repair before, but I am re-showing you how to lay out one as much as anything in this video. So I'll make that thumbnail pop up here at the end of the video. So do you guys have any questions about anything I did? Because if you did, I try and answer all your questions. Just ask it down there in that description down below. No, don't ask it in the description. Ask it in the comments. But be sure and check out the description for some more good information, like links to all the tools we're using in this video. That's the basics of laying out and cutting out a ceiling repair. If you like learning tasks like this so you can do your own home improvement projects, repairs and so on, be sure and subscribe and click the bell icon. And I thank you guys so much for stopping by. As always, you guys are why I do this. I hope I'm helping you out. Let me know if I am, because I really like hearing it. See you on the next video, and everybody, take care.